Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Jake Gordon. It's a little weird feeling in Braves country. They've lost 3 in a row for the first time since I think the Blue Jays, when they got swept by the Blue Jays, which was early May. And yesterday's game was thrilling, but it was also really frustrating. The Braves had 3 errors. Their pitching staff imploded from start to finish. And that's what I want to lead off the show with, the guy who started the game, Bryce Elder. He only goes 2 2/3 of an inning. He gives up 7 runs, 5 of which were earned. What's the level of concern here with Elder? Because we're talking about a guy who began the year in AAA. He was fantastic through until his last start against the Rays, but his last 2 starts, he's given up 14 runs, 12 of them earned, and just 6 innings of work. And when you talk about the actual holes on this team, what could prevent the Braves from winning a championship? I think the most glaring one is probably the rotation. Now, that doesn't mean I think it should be the biggest need for an ad, but I just think, because I think it's hard to get starting pitching, it's expensive. The Braves don't have a lot of top prospects. They do have guys like Max Fried coming back. Hopefully Kyle Wright can come back. Hopefully this isn't a Bryce Elder like trend in the wrong direction. But hypothetically, let's say Bryce Elder is a potato the rest of the season and someone else gets injured. Now you're like, oh, what do we got here? This offense better hit 10 runs a game and we might be in some trouble.
Yeah, but also, well, okay, first off, they kind of ran into that problem last year with Spencer Strider. He was in the playoffs throwing like 91 miles an hour. It was clear that he wasn't healthy.
And Fried was sick.
Yeah, he lost like 15 pounds in a week or whatever it was. I think the main thing with Elder that we have to remember is, number one, so he had a start against Cleveland, 7 innings, I think 2 earned runs maybe. Those last 2 starts where he's been terrible have been against Tampa Bay and Arizona. And they're both pretty good teams. Arizona's like 2 games out of the lead for the NL West, which is one of the most competitive divisions in baseball. And the Rays have the second best record in the league. So, I think it's important to put a little bit of it into perspective. That's really not an excuse. When it comes to playoff time, you got to be able to buck with the big boys. But I don't think it's necessarily a huge cause of concern just because he's had 2 bad starts against 2 good teams.
Yeah, and I mean, you still look at Elder's ERA for the season. It's sitting there at 3.3, one of the best in the National League. And listen, he's had a lot of success against good teams. I mean, we've seen him pitch well against the Astros, the Blue Jays, the Mariners. So it's not like there was this kind of narrative early, oh, he only pitches well against the Nationals and the Marlins. He bucked that early in the season. He's pitched it well against a lot of really good teams. And I think what you're seeing is a lot. Listen, think back 6 weeks ago to Spencer Strider, who has a lot better stuff. Listen, you get a little like out of whack. You're a young pitcher. He's only 24 years old. He only has, 20, 25 starts under his belt. Like, it's not abnormal for these guys to hit bumps in the road. And I think that's what you're seeing with Bryce Elder. Listen, Bryce Elder has been great at things like getting out of jams, getting ground balls. That's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you get hard. And when you're a guy like Bryce Elder and you're pitching 90, 89, 91 miles per hour, like Spencer Strider saw the slightest dip in his velocity, and you saw how much more vulnerable he was when he was missing his spots. Well, Bryce Elder doesn't have that velocity at all. So he's always going to be very vulnerable if he's not missing his spots. And if you watch these games, this is just not the same Bryce Elder that we've seen over his entire career, whether you're going back to AAA or AA or single A or whatever. This is a guy who locates his pitches, keeps the ball down, gets ground balls. And so far, over these last 2 starts, he's elevated his sinker. His breaking balls have been hanging over the middle of the plate. And if you do that, you're not going to have success. But what I will give Elder credit for is we know he's a really good pitcher when it comes to control. And I think that's something he's going to get back. So I do not think Bryce Elder is an NL Cy Young candidate. Like, I never thought he was that kind of pitcher. He kind of has more mid to back rotation arm, but that's what the Braves need, especially when Max Fried comes back. And I think it will all come together. It reminds me a lot, even though they're totally different pitchers, of just a young pitcher like Spencer Strider hitting his first real bump in the road, because we haven't really seen Bryce Elder struggle. Even dating back to last year, we're talking about a guy who had like a 2.5 ERA. We haven't really seen this guy struggle at all at the major league level, not even really at the minor league level. So this is baseball, guys. 2 starts. You're not going to get me sitting here like, oh, we need to trade Bryce Elder, which I've seen a lot of. Like I talked about the other day, selling high on Bryce Elder. That's one thing. Trading him just because you think he's going to be like after 3 or 4 bad starts, if that happens, that would just be stupid. We're not selling low on Bryce Elder. We're supposed to be selling high on Bryce Elder.
Yeah, definitely. Here's my thing. If you had told me before the year started, you said his ERA is what, a 3.31. If you had told me that the opening day when Ed Striver starter would be in the majors at the trade deadline with a 3.31 ERA, no matter who it was, I would have been extremely happy. Like, that's a really unexpected contribution for a lot of teams. And yeah, it's unfortunate the Braves have had the injuries that they have, but it's kind of just a fact of life. But I do agree, and not in mostly in general in terms of trade thoughts, but if it's still not working in about a week or two at the trade deadline, it's really going to force their hand to make a trade for a starter, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about it on the site. Go check it out, sportstalkatl.com. I mean, there's definitely a rising sense of concern that I haven't really had this whole season about the rotation. And mostly stems from kind of making it disaster proof, like making sure that if someone else doesn't get injured, or maybe like we saw last year with Spencer Strider and Max Fried, that if one of those guys isn't 100%, or Bryce Elder's a tomato can, or Charlie Morton reverts back to where he's giving up home runs every 3 or 4 innings, making it disaster proof and just getting an arm in there. I don't think it's going to be a star. If they went out and got it, I mean, I do think it would take everything that they have. They could go out there and try to make a push for a Marcus Stroman type or a Lucas Giolito or something like that. I don't know if that's necessary, but at least adding some depth in some form or fashion. We might talk about the Cubs and some of the guys they have away from Marcus Stroman, a Drew Smyly or a Kyle Hendricks type. Like, maybe that makes some sense, won't cost nearly as much. But I think making the rotation disaster proof, given how many injuries this entire pitching staff has faced, makes some sense.
Yeah, I brought this up a few times. I think Jordan Montgomery is a fantastic target. He's on the Cardinals, not good. I was wrong when I said I thought the Cardinals would rise from the dead like going at the end of the season. Now it's still terrible. But Montgomery, left-handed guy, 3.14 ERA. He's kind of a horse. He throws a lot of innings. The Braves could probably use another lefty too. It'd be nice to have two with Fried. I don't know. I think he'd be a solid pickup. He's a rental. He's a free agent this offseason, so I don't think he would cost as much. And maybe you could re-sign him.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the targets the Braves should probably be targeting are rentals, because I still believe in the future of this rotation with Strider. I think Morton probably comes back for another year. I don't see him retiring. Fried, Elder, AJ Smith-Shawver, Kyle Wright, Michael Soroka. Like, you have depth for the future. I think getting a guy for the here and now in the rental aspect, because starting pitching, as I said, super, super, super expensive at the trade deadline. And if you get it, especially when it's cost controlled. So I see it being much harder to get a guy that's cost controlled rather than one guy. Coming up after the break, despite the loss, we had some good news in Braves country. Travis d'Arnaud inks an extension with the team.